Hey, what's good, man?
What's up, fucker?
That's the energy we want to carry forward into the show going forward, I think.
I've decided that's the kind of guy I am now.
No more of the genteel hellos.
What's up, fuckers? Welcome back to Heavy Hands.
Yeah, just make sure that you replace the intro with some chugga bullshit butt rock.
I'm your host, Connor the Sack Rebush. Welcome back. Heavy hands, more like heavy balls. And then a huge guitar riff comes in. I'm glad you're on board for this. I was really pretty nervous about how you would react.
No, I think this is what we need.
Welcome, everyone, to another edition of Heavy Hands. I am your host, Connor Rebush. With me, as always, is Phil McKenzie. And, well, I feel like I've lost all confidence in my ability to intro an episode of this show, Phil. Ever since I noticed that I have certain tics and habits, I'm a shell of myself. I'm like Darren Till coming into the fight with Kelvin Gastelum. Just before I hit record, I was like, is there some way I can fake a vocal cord injury and get out of this? Please don't make me go in there.
But there's some way to escape. No, you just need to be like Darren Till. You just need to fight through it, Connor, and put on the performance of a career with your back against the wall.
I can do it. Now that I've been talking for 45 seconds, I realize that this is, in fact, what I was born to do. This is going to be the greatest episode of Heavy Hands ever.
God.
So welcome to what will likely be one of the worst episodes we've ever done. We are previewing on this week's show just one fight. People were kvetching a little bit about us not recapping things on last week's episode. First of all, we put up our Maya Askren and our McDonald Lima 2 recaps on Patreon. We had to do it in the bonus episode, but guys, there's too much stuff happening on the schedule. I like talking about fights in retrospect. I generally prefer it to previewing, because previewing, like, no matter how educated my guesses are, they're guesses. And I like to talk about the actual material outcomes. I'm sorry that we didn't have time last week to do recapping anything on the main episode. Today, we carved out more time for it. As far as previews go, we are just going to be looking ahead to one of the fights set for next weekend's card. That is the main event, Zabit Magomedsharipov versus Calvin Kattar. Fascinating matchup in the featherweight division. Weirdly, a 3-round main event, but very interesting. There's some other stuff on this card, but forget it. We're going to spend the rest of the show after that looking back at what just happened this weekend at UFC 244. Of course, Jorge Masvidal defeated Nate Diaz in the main event, stopped on cuts. Maybe we'll get into our feelings on that. I think everyone's already kind of softened on it. We'll talk about Darren Till's aforementioned successful middleweight debut. We'll talk about Stephen Thompson's incredible victory over a incredibly tough Vicente Luque. We're going to have Kevin Lee. Holy shit, are we going to talk about Kevin Lee? There's lots of stuff to discuss. Lots of things I got wrong. I will say that much. Lots of predictions I got wrong. Lots of fights where people came in sort of with their backs to the wall and had to show new things that I did not foresee or predict would happen. So all of that, like I said, I love doing that shit. I'm excited for it. That's going to be segments 2 and 3. Very much looking forward to breaking down UFC 244. But to start, as I said, Zabit versus Kattar. Phil, are you ready to dig into this one?
Kind of, yes. I mean,
that's how I feel. That's how I always feel when we're previewing.
I mean, I will say, like, we tend to vacillate between ones we are unreasonably confident in and ones where we're just like, I have no idea what's going to happen in this fight. And I feel like this one drops squarely into the second category, because this is the one between, like, the darling of Joe Rogan and the sort of popular crowd in Zabit and the kind of hardcore analyst fanboys in Calvin Kattar. And one of these guys is just a super weird, flashy guy with some incredible and somewhat unexpected strengths. And the other guy is just a real nuts and bolts technician.
Mm-hmm.
So the way it could pan out is very difficult to nail down, in my opinion.
Right. And of course, those lines are blurred. Like, Calvin Kattar is a great technician, but he also seems to hit very hard. The irony that his nickname has been the Boston Finisher, as far as I know, throughout his career, but he waited to actually get to the UFC before he started knocking people out. But now he tends to hurt people in every fight. So he's the technical maestro, but is in fact very dynamic as a fighter. On the other hand, the lines are blurred with Zabit too, because he's the crazy dynamic guy. But when you get right down to it, there's a lot of good fundamental technique to his game as well. Like, there's the crazy kicks and all that. Zabit, he's like, he reminds you of Conor McGregor in a lot of ways, by which I do not mean that he is a rapist, but rather that all of the crazy dynamic kicks, the spinning moves, sort of distracts from the real basic elements of his game. Like, for me personally, when he first got signed to the UFC and I watched his fights, I was not most impressed by the crazy kicks and stuff. I'm totally over that kind of stuff. I was taken in by his jab and his footwork.
Yeah, I was going to say that's his real difference between him and McGregor, is that his best weapon is his lead hand.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Different approaches, but in a similar sense that, like, what really made McGregor special was, like, he was a great counterpuncher. Really good straight shots, good ability to set up, draw out, and time a counter. And Zabit has the crazy shit, but, like, I still think his footwork is probably the best aspect of his game. And that has me. That's basically what has me uncertain about this matchup. I think certainly the vaping scooter gang have already agreed that Calvin Kattar is the guy to pick here. And there's something to that, right? Like, we have seen Zabit falter under pressure. I think we know from some of his more recent performances that Kattar can be quite effective as a come-forward fighter. The fact that Zabit will now, for the first time, sort of be at reach parity with a similarly skilled boxer, all that's interesting. But I don't want to overlook the fact that Zabit is himself quite a capable and flexible boxer. Plus, he has all of the elements of his ground game, his wrestling and his ground game to back that up. So, yeah, why don't we get into it? I don't know. What do you see? Key dynamics in this matchup. Any idea?
So, I mean, one of the first things that you got to think of is obviously Kattar's lone UFC loss, which was a reasonably one-sided and somewhat surprising at the time, loss to Renato Moicano. Because this is a tall, powerful kicker with a highly developed lead hand and a great ground game to back it up.
Mm-hmm.
And that, in and of itself, is got to leave you with some questions, right?
Mm-hmm.
Is that you've got to be like, and so the question is, how much can Zabit kind of replicate that kind of game plan? Because he is not a classical kicker in the same sense that he's not a classical kicker in the same sense that Moicano is. He is not. Nor I would say he has a good developed jab, but he doesn't jab in quite the same way. He doesn't have as much. He doesn't have as much ways in which he jabs. He won't like jab multiple times in the way that Moicano does. He won't draw people into like jabbing exchanges specifically in order to kick their leg in a way that Moicano can.
Mm-hmm.
But like that basic dynamic is there, and it's a concerning one. But then on the other hand, you can look at it and you can say one of Kattar's best performances was against a tall, rangy kicker with decent footwork and a good jab in Andre Fili when he won his upset debut, I think, in the UFC. And I don't think many people were picking Fili to win that one, but I believe you did, right? I mean, Kattar.
I did actually. Yeah. I remember picking Kattar. But yeah, I think he was definitely the underdog. Most people were going for Fili on that one. Not to brag, like you guys just saw a card last weekend where I got almost everything wrong. So it's okay for me to say, yes, I got that one right. What was your point?
Just that, like, it's rarely as simple as we can.
Yes.
So, I mean, I guess the thing is, like, where do I think Zabit falls between, like, where do I think the commonalities between Zabit and Fili and Moicano are? And I would say I think he's actually closer to Fili. I think that the main difference is that he's just a far more dangerous wrestler. He's a far more dangerous wrestler.
Yeah, I think he's I think he's a little more. Honestly, I think he came into the UFC a little more comfortable fighting off the back foot than Fili really has been until his last few fights. So I will put that out there. That I don't know that, like, Fili has always been a remarkably inconsistent fighter. You know, he's one of those guys who really seems to fight on his emotions, and gets really, really tunnel visiony depending on who he's fighting. So, yeah, but I agree. Like, to me, Zabit is sort of somewhere in the middle of those two matchups. One that can quite soundly beat Kattar, and one that Kattar can quite soundly beat. You know, like, to your point about the kicking game. Yes, Zabit is not that kind of kicker. Maybe he shares some this is where he shares common ground with Fili, and that he can also be inconsistent. He can sort of pick something that works and then just sort of get focused on something else and forget about it. That's not something that happens with Moicano, right? Like, Moicano is he has a process. He has a set of tools that he wants to play off of each other, and he sticks to those tools. But there's wiggle room there. Like, in the first round of his fight with Jeremy Stephens, there are a lot of occasions where Zabit was timing Stephens' forward steps with some really hard low kicks, was off balancing him. And so that's there. The fact that he kind of went away from it as the fight continued, that's more on the Fili side. But I don't know. This is why I have questions about this matchup.
Yeah, so one of the things that makes Kattar an effective boxer is also, I think, one of the things which made that Moicano fight a bit challenging for him. Mm-hmm. And that is the fact that he is always on top of his feet and he carries them with him. And this is, in one of the ways that, you know, makes MMA great, this is a two-edged sword, in that it allows him to throw power whilst not getting himself hugely out of position, but also means that he's always planted. And so that, like, there is time to counter hit, to, like, as you mentioned, to, like, kick him as he steps in. Mm-hmm. And, you know, I think if we think of Zabit's fight with... That's the thing. If we think of stuff like Zabit's fight with Kyle Bochniak, is that has... That win has not aged very well, let's say. Because Bochniak is incredibly tough and just will not give up and will keep coming. And that was kind of all that he needed to make that fight weirdly competitive in the third round. Yeah, like, certainly in his most recent fight, Sean Woodson styled on Bochniak way more profoundly than Zabit did. So yeah, that's a very good point. That just by still being there and coming forward, you are basically, like, in my mind, you're pretty much guaranteed to give Zabit a really miserable third round, at least. And it's worth reiterating, by the way, I think I mentioned this up top, but this is a 3-round main event. So that's also a factor to consider that's probably good for Zabit. Because I think everyone is sort of in agreement that when Zabit does get to 5-round fights, if he does, he is going to run into serious problems in the 4th and 5th rounds. You know, the man may have a second wind in him, but on more than one occasion we have seen
some pretty formless raw pressure cause him to exhaust himself by the end of the fight. So, but anyway, please go on.
Yeah. So that's a concern. But like one thing I do worry about. So what do you think of like Kattar's tendency to just like to headhunt? Because I like Kattar's boxing a lot, but like even in that Burgos fight, which is, you know, one of the best fights in recent memory, it's very much a fight of one guy who was like mixing up the area that he was going to, and the other guy was just mixing up the timing and the rhythm of his attack. Of his target. He was just, you know, playing with the jab and the right hand, and he did it very well, but he didn't just, you know, there are other ways to mix it up, which is just to like hit the body, and that really seems like something you'd want to do. It's one of the things that I worry that Kattar is going to be on, much like he is in the Moicano fight. He's just going to end up being on the attritional, like he's going to be on the wrong end of attritional fights, and he's going to end up chasing. He's going to end up chasing the head too much.
I think that's a very fair point. Kattar is maybe the best jabber in the featherweight division. He's probably got the best 1-2 and a whole game that surrounds that. But that really is the Kattar game. And like with a guy like Zabit, obviously, if he's had these stamina issues, you want to be pressing that gas tank as often as possible. I think that's a very valid concern that Zabit. Here's the thing, like I still don't know how much I trust Zabit. Like I don't know how much he's like figured out his process. So he's got the opportunity to be doing a greater attrition. Is he going to stick to those leg kicks under pressure? And my assumption is, maybe this will be proven to be wrong. They often are. But my assumption is that Kattar, much as he did against Ricardo Lamas, who also we saw as a potential threat from kicking range, he's going to come in looking to pressure. It's going to be harder, I think, right from the jump, just because Zabit has a jab and reach. So he's going to end up spending, I think, more time having to actually wiggle his way into range and set up his strikes. But I don't know. Is Zabit going to stick to the legs? You know, he didn't really do it against Jeremy Stephens. Like he can kind of get put off these things.
But also, like the Jeremy Stephens fight was kind of a replica of. It was a broad replica, and one of the reasons why I didn't, you know, favor Stephens going in, it was too close to that Oliveira fight. It's just a big tall guy, and Stephens was going to plod after him and either be hit from long range, or the guy would just take a single step forward to meet him in the clinch and out wrestle him. And both those fights were kind of. I trust like I didn't pick Kattar to beat Lamas just because I was like, he's going to be able to jab and low kick him and then hit resting takedowns, and that, you know, that's kind of what I think.
That's the threat here, right?
Zabit's path to victory is here, and I thought he did an amazing job. He didn't let Lamas get away with a single raw low kick. So I think that if Zabit is going to play the jab low kick game with Kattar, he's going to have to set it up and commit to it. He's going to have to draw him into jab exchanges like Moicano did. I'm not sure if he's quite that guy. So I think I'm slightly favoring Kattar, but there is just I feel like this is just a very qualification-filled prediction. There's just the risk that Kattar is just like Poirier, and we've just never seen him fight anyone who really wants to grapple with him, who's got a chance to.
Right.
Like that he's just never really let anyone set up significant wrestling offense on him, and then once he does, you might see it and just be like, oh, he's not ready for this kind of fight at all.
Yeah, that's my major concern. What were you saying?
Yeah, I mean, there's just a bunch of X factors in it. I think I'm going to slightly favor Kattar. I mean, I think he did I was very impressed by that win over Lamas. It might just be that Lamas is shot, but even in a short-term tactical fight, he did a good job of taking away some of the weapons that like Zabit's going to have to go to.
At the very least, he showed in that fight that he recognized what the counters to his approach were. Like what he recognized the danger areas in Lamas's game. You said this before we began recording, but like, Calvin Kattar, he dealt with the low kicks in that fight. It doesn't necessarily mean that they're not a problem for him, right? In the same way that low kicks were always a vulnerability for Lyoto Machida, will always be a vulnerability for Stephen Thompson. Just Kattar's style, the fact that he comes forward, he likes to lead with the jab, he's fairly heavy on that front foot. That's how he builds his attacks. He's always going to be susceptible to those strikes. But his awareness of that against Ricardo Lamas was big. He came in with tactics specifically prepared to nullify that problem area as much as possible. And yeah, that to me is a better sign than anything I've really seen from Zabit. Zabit has like an incredibly weird, diverse game, but he's also not like, he hasn't really run away with any of his UFC fights. I think he has a lot of trouble maintaining a consistent pace. Like, this is one area in which I would say Renato Moicano is considerably better than Zabit. He's just way more consistent. And yeah, I think I still kind of just side with your point about the Bochniak fight. Like, both Bochniak and Stevens did not have the right solutions to Zabit's footwork. They did not have the degree of footwork that Calvin Kattar does. They didn't have the range weapons that Kattar's going to have. And even so, just by surviving, they were able to get to him eventually. So yeah, I think that's a good sign for Kattar. The reach, I think, is going to allow him to get to Zabit sooner. I'm still concerned about those weird ass takedowns, and how much. That's how much is that going to neuter the Calvin Kattar game? I really don't know. But until I see it, I think I'll sort of narrowly side with Kattar as well. Great fight, very very exciting matchup. Looking forward to that. Also, probably for the first time ever, looking forward to a Greg Hardy fight. And I say that knowing that if it doesn't go the way I think it will, I'm going to be more devastated than ever before. It will ruin me. So if Greg Hardy beats Alexander Volkov next weekend, I'm so sorry, but it turns out this was the last episode of Heavy Hands. But provided that doesn't happen, let's take a break. Let's come back. UFC 244 just happened. It's still in our minds. It was a crazy, momentous card. And we're going to talk about it after this.
Hey everybody, thanks for listening to this week's Heavy Hands. If you like what you hear, please consider pledging to support the podcast on Patreon. Patreon is basically continuous crowdfunding. You sign up to contribute a certain amount per month to help us with production costs and the like, and in return you get rewards ranging from a mention on the Heavy Hands website to a question or topic of your choice being discussed on the show. We have a lot more in the works to reward you for your help, and we appreciate every contribution. No amount is too small. Just head over to patreon.com and find how you can help out, the only show dedicated to the finer points of face punching. Now let's get back to it.
Welcome back to Heavy Hands. We are talking about UFC 244 in the main event. Jorge Masvidal, Nate Diaz. It felt a little pat perhaps last week, but I think a lot of my analysis of this main event boiled down to Jorge Masvidal is kind of better at everything. And is it a little too pat for me to say that that's kind of how the fight looked? He was just a little better at everything.
I think that's a little unfair because he looked a lot better at everything.
Okay. All right. Yeah. I mean, I guess, do we have to first talk about the cut? Like, I guess I should at least say what my reactions were. Initially, I was like, oh, that sucks. Like, things were kind of heating up. Things were still happening. I've seen Nate Diaz cut many times before. On the other hand, he was not winning that fight. He lost every round very clearly. He was very unlikely to tire Jorge Masvidal out. And it was an awful cut. So, like, do I never want cuts to be a reason for stopping fights? No, I didn't enjoy looking at that cut, especially once I got a chance to look at it again and reevaluate my position. So, was I disappointed at the time? Yes. Am I disappointed now? Not really. What about you?
Yeah, same kind of thing. I was like, oh, that's kind of that's not cool. But at the time, but also like it was super bad, and he was just getting shit kicked out of him. It wasn't as far along the this wasn't going to change at all, who cares spectrum as
some people have.
Like Cerrone Ferguson.
Right.
But it was the same kind of thing. Like,
yeah,
you should just go out there and let this guy fucking die. And I was like, yeah, he really wasn't going to win. He was much, much more damaged, visibly far more tired, like, and had probably picked up a couple of 10-8 rounds against him.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, it was a huge fucking cut, and he was constantly pouring blood out of his own eyes.
Yeah. So yeah, fine with the way it ended. What do you make of the fight itself? Other than just Jorge Masvidal being significantly better. In what ways was he significantly better than Nate Diaz?
I mean, I was sort of worried. You know, we were worried before we saw this that Nate Diaz might be sort of, like shot is not necessarily the word, but degrading.
Yeah.
And this definitely looked like the case. I mean, yeah, we suspected for a while that he has to be at welterweight because he literally can't make lightweight anymore. But the problem is that Masvidal kind of combined two of the problems with welterweight in that he couldn't just out-muscle people in the clinch. He couldn't just out-muscle Masvidal in the clinch because Masvidal was a fucking huge lightweight. Mm-hmm. But also that Masvidal was still, like, as a former lightweight, he was just much faster than him.
Way quicker, yeah. Also, like, Masvidal at 170 is a puncher. Mm-hmm. There's no doubt about that. The man has... I think a lot of this is... Sort of the funny thing is that Jorge Masvidal reached a point in his career where he just decided to start knocking people out. Like, I strongly suspect he's always been a pretty respectable hitter and has now just changed his approach up. And perhaps unlimbered by the fact that he's no longer cutting quite so much weight. But yeah, like, Masvidal was cracking Nate Diaz with some sickening punches. The weird sort of dynamic entries we talked about last week, like, that was throwing Nate off. Nate was just not able to keep up with Masvidal. He was having success sort of playing games with Masvidal's defense in the rare moments when he was actually managing to back Masvidal up in a straight line. You know, like, Masvidal has never been the greatest defensive striker. He tends to stand quite tall, and he does move his head, but it's not like a thing that's sort of like baked into his style. Like, Masvidal has to see the shot coming and make the decision to evade it. And the fact that he is such an attentive fighter, sometimes to his own detriment, is what has allowed him to start slipping things and start picking and parrying off punches as the fight goes on. So, like, yeah, there were some moments where Nate was making his reach a factor. He was switching up between the left straight and the left hook, playing with Masvidal when he was thinking of parrying and or slipping that shot and catching him with the other. There was some good stuff from Nate Diaz. But, like, in all the moments between, or rather I should say all the time between those moments of success, he was looking really, really rough to me. He was... Yeah.
I liked him mixing up, like, a little sneaky right hand up the middle or the big slapping wide right around the guard and then coming up with the left. Yeah, it was all nice little things, but it was the fact that Masvidal could enter into range much faster than he could. Masvidal was doing, like, at least as well in the exchanges. Mm-hmm. But it was also that, like, when they got into exchanges, Masvidal just refused to go away.
Yep.
He would just, even if he was taking punches, he would just keep throwing back. And what often ended the exchange was that Masvidal would just kick him in the body, and Nate would just be like, "Holy shit, what the fuck was that?"
We talked about
that exchange.
We talked about the growing importance of punch kick combinations to the Masvidal game. Very big factor here. Like, honestly, in a lot of ways, Nate looked like the boxer and Masvidal like a Muay Thai fighter. Like a lot of sort of bouncing up with that lead leg at range and then jabbing in to set up the body kick. In addition, of course, to the savage, perfectly timed head kick that he knocked Diaz down with in the first round.
Yeah, and you know, this is the problem with Nate as becoming the budget version of Nick, is that he doesn't have all of Nick's weapons, and he doesn't have Nick's body shots.
That's a really big factor. That is the crucial element of the Nick Diaz style, is that he was a ferocious and relentless body puncher. And without that, an attritional approach like that, a swarming approach, loses a lot of its appeal, a lot of its efficacy.
I mean, Masvidal was not just the body kicker in this fight; he was the body puncher.
And yeah, like again, maybe this sort of boils the whole fight down to me. That Nate had success when he was sort of when he was using those, pressing forward and using those sort of punch switch ups, like I was talking about, playing the big sweeping shots off the straight shots. Those worked. Masvidal did similar stuff. And when Masvidal did it, it was way more effective. Like, that's really what it boils down to. Masvidal's physicality was a factor here. There was one moment, I think, in round 2, the right hand that he really hurt Nate Diaz with, where he sort of was circling off to Nate's side. He waited for Nate to like step across to follow him. I think he saw Nate parrying with his rear hand, trying to anticipate the right, and he just threw a looping right hand around it, and Nate was out of position. He wasn't quick enough to move his feet and also stay in a stable stance at the same time. Like, there were just too many little opportunities where Nate was having to play catch up, that Masvidal was super aggressively minded and took advantage of basically every single one of them. Every time he got Nate to reset his feet or get himself out of position, every time he got Nate to reach for a punch, he was following up. You know, even down to the clinch exchanges. Every time he got Nate to think about grabbing onto a single leg, boom, immediately smashing him with 1,000 elbows in a row right on that unprotected side. It was just, to me, this was like the embodiment of the new aggressive Jorge Masvidal. That he has decided at this point in his career, he's not going to let opportunities to hit the other guy in the face or the body or the legs really hard pass him by. And when he hits somebody once with a good shot, he is much more likely than ever before to just continue pouring it on. So.
Yeah, I mean, the great thing is that you're seeing, like, Masvidal in the past, he always seemed like someone who had to prove that nothing, like, it didn't mean anything to him. That, you know, everything, that he was just the coolest. He was just like the coolest guy in the octagon. And, you know,
not mad.
Even if guys were getting to him, you know, they clearly weren't technically able to hang with him. And he was just, you know, he's Jorge Masvidal. And that it was, it felt performative. But it didn't feel like he particularly enjoyed being in those fights all of the time.
Right.
But, like, he was fucking loving this fight.
Yeah, the posturing is fully integrated now. Like, he is in there enjoying beating the shit out of people.
And, like, it's just great to see, like, you know, this is the guy that everyone thought he could be for all those years. And you rarely get to see this kind of, I mean, this is perhaps even more extreme than the Robbie Lawler transformation. I mean, in part because it so clearly wasn't to do with his technical focus. I mean, Robbie Lawler, it was a case of, like,
he just wasn't good at the start.
Yeah. Lawler kind of like, I can't be bothered to learn this takedown defense shit. And then he went to American Top Team and spent a couple of weeks there, and he was like, oh yeah, I can do this. It's easy. And with Masvidal, all the technical pieces were there, but it was just that he refused to, like, apply them in a way that would put himself at risk, and as such, lost lots more fights than he should have. But like now we're seeing like the undeniably the greatest performance, the best version of Jorge Masvidal in the 16th year of his professional MMA career.
Yep. It's remarkable. And maybe fighters evolving not necessarily technically, but mentally is a bit of a theme for this episode, because I think we're going to be able to speak on similar terms about Darren Till and his performance over Kelvin Gastelum in the co-main event. Are we ready to move on from the main event? I mean, it was largely a very one-sided fight.
Yep.
You know, like I agree with you. It was not as one-sided and doomed in the direction it was headed as a Cerrone Ferguson, but it was along the lines of like, it was like watching like Shevchenko, Jędrzejczyk, or Jędrzejczyk Kowalkiewicz. Like, yes, there are moments, but one person clearly has the edge, and something crazy is going to have to happen for it to change. So yeah, that's that. Main event wrapped up. The co-main event, though, Darren Till. I liked this performance. I am willing to acknowledge that it was not a great fight. In fact, it was, I think you could fairly say, one of, if not the worst fight on the card in terms of pure action. But as someone who was sort of invested in Darren Till, who was a little nervous for his sake, who was very curious to see how he would perform, having finally moved up to 185, I found myself quite engaged by what he was doing. And for me, the big takeaway from this fight, like the big point to make, is the distinction between development on a technical level, or even development on the sort of the cruder version of the technical level, which is just adding more moves, and development on the mental and approach side of things. To me, this was, if you were to look at the moves he used and how he used them, this was a Darren Till fight. There was nothing really new here. There was, and what I like to see Darren Till, throw a right hook after that left straight, you bet I would. Would I like to see Darren Till be a little more aggressive and assertive in his clinch positions with hauling his opponent off balance and playing strikes off of each other? Absolutely. I would like to see more moves. But to me, since I'm always banging on the drum about how development as a fighter goes way beyond just adding more moves to your toolkit, I was pleased by this fight because it was the exact Darren Till toolkit. It was the 1-2. It was the straight left hand. It was the double collar tie. It was the occasional kick. What was different, and it was profoundly different, was the context in which Darren Till used those moves. And that was the context of back foot fighting, of being an all the way in or all the way out fighter, rather than an aggressive pressure fighter and aggressive counterpuncher. So to me, that's like a big corner for Darren Till to have turned. Our big point about him leading into this fight was he's super vulnerable on the back foot, and he looked better and more comfortable in that kind of fight than we have ever seen him before.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with pretty much all that. I think this was a great performance from. I mean, it wasn't a great performance from Till, but it was
important.
What's the best way to put this? Yeah, it was smart. It made sense.
Yeah.
You could tell that he had. I mean, just like the incidentals around this fight. If you heard the two of them talking beforehand, Till was just like, all I care about is Kelvin Gastelum. I'm just focusing on this fight. Kelvin Gastelum was just like, I want a title shot. I'm going to go through wherever I want to get it. I'm going to come in overweight and cheat to get on the scales. Like,
I love that move, by the way.
Hell yeah. This did not. It did not feel like Kelvin. I felt like Kelvin Gastelum had taken away what a lot of us took away, which is that he'd done pretty well against Israel Adesanya, and therefore he would just be able to mop up on Darren Till.
Yes. Kelvin Gastelum is one of my favorite dumb dudes in the sport, because I think he definitely was like, I feel really good about that performance, as I should, and did not seem to reflect on what it was that had enabled him to be so competitive in that fight.
Yeah, he wasn't just like, I've taken some steps forward here. I'm going to take some going to carry on taking some steps forward. It would just seem like
I'm as good as I've always thought I was.
Yeah, I'm here now.
It was always going to turn out this way.
My evolution is done.
Yep. So yeah, that has to be said, right? It was not only a great, if not a great performance, a significant performance from Darren Till. It was also a significantly bad showing from Kelvin Gastelum. It has to be said. Yeah,
because I think one of the problems I think we saw, or at least I saw coming with Till, is that he is, we talk about how it's a good idea for strikers to move up in a weight class, as long as they're, physically strong enough and long enough and so on to survive up there. Because, accuracy, speed, like stamina, etc. These all kind of go up as you go up in weight. You can hit people cleaner and you can keep a pace better. Darren Till was someone I was worried about because he leaned so heavily on his size.
Mm-hmm.
And, in a kind of similar way to Conor McGregor,
mm-hmm.
the person that he often somewhat unjustly gets compared to, he did have some similarities, and he was just a huge fucking guy with a really accurate power hand, and he would traditionally be fighting an open stance matchup where you have to cover a big amount of space, and then he would just punch you with the left hand.
Mm-hmm.
And it was very accurate, and it hurt a lot. And those were two things that those guys did, and they made a lot of hay out of being gigantic for their weight classes. And I was like, is he actually going to do that well now that he's not able to do that as much anymore? But, like you said, we saw a middleweight Darren Till. We saw him,
mm-hmm.
He was talking afterwards about what he knew that it was going to be different. He knew that things were going to change, that there was going to be he was going to have to fight different kinds of fights. And he did. He fought as you mentioned, it was a back foot performance. It was one where he made sure that he wasn't getting drawn into exchanges. He was using what should be, he was using more speed and less power.
Mm-hmm.
And that was good to see. I mean, yeah, as you mentioned, it was kind of horrific to watch.
Yeah, it wasn't great.
And, the two of them must have landed maybe 10 strikes to the head apiece, if that.
Let's see what Fight Metric has to say.
Yeah.
Fight Metric
probably more
says,
than that, to be fair.
They each landed, let's see, Gastelum actually, he outlanded Till by 4 significant strikes. Incredible. 40 to Darren Till's 36. And it says that Gastelum, 20% of his strikes were to the head. Darren Till, 52%. So Darren Till landed some 17, 18 strikes to the head, and Kelvin Gastelum landed, 10?
Yeah.
Great.
I mean, it was also a pretty close fight.
It was absolutely close. Yeah. Like I said,
I'm not sure how anyone gave Kelvin Gastelum the first round, but
no idea. Till certainly didn't run away with it, and if I were him, I would still have been nervous about which way the cards were going to go. But it was a smart showing. It hinted at a sort of progression. It hinted at Darren Till having potentially, at least, turned a mental corner. It was a mental adjustment. It was a reordering of how the same tools are best to be used against this opponent in this new weight class. That to me is significant. Yeah, I do want to double back just to hit again on one thing you mentioned. I think the all the way in, all the way out aspect was really significant in this fight. First of all, I want to reemphasize that Kelvin Gastelum's pressure fighting was truly, not worse than ever. It was just the way it's always been, except for the Adesanya fight, right? It was a real regression, where he just kind of followed Darren Till around. He came into this fight seeming to think, I guess I can't blame him to some extent, seeming to think that he wouldn't have to cut off the cage too much, that he was just going to have the edge as long as he was willing to come forward. I don't know. It seems perhaps a little arrogant to think that Darren Till, when you're actually fighting him, couldn't have done anything different. But all that aside, something I always harp on this show and in many articles over the years is that no matter how good your retreating footwork is, no matter how good your lateral movement is, no matter how exceptional you are at maintaining distance, no matter how much quicker you are than your opponent, if the other guy is determined to get to you, eventually he is going to. You just can't run backwards faster than a guy can run forwards. And when you have to worry about the punches that guy is bringing along with him as he's hurtling his body weight towards you, eventually he's going to catch up to you. He's going to collide with you. And I thought Darren Till did a really exceptional job. Again, without having added any new tools, without really having become a better defensive boxer or a better pocket striker, he did an excellent job of picking his spots and knowing when to smother Kelvin Gastelum's advance. The clinch was it wasn't super effective there necessarily with strikes, but strategically, the clinch was a really, really important part of this performance. That was in some ways the key adjustment that allowed Darren Till to be a back foot fighter, is that he used the timing that he might normally use on his left hand to tell exactly when Kelvin Gastelum had committed himself, was getting just a little too close to keep running away from him, and now's the time when I either stop retreating or I step forward myself, close the distance on my own terms. That was really good. So yeah, not a great fight, maybe not even a great performance, but an intelligent showing from Darren Till. And to me, that is more encouraging than basically any other way I saw this fight playing out for his part.
Unfortunately, he's now beaten the number 4 middleweight in the world, so
it's over.
His options for his next fight are very limited.
Yep. I don't know. There were whispers about Robert Whittaker getting the rematch with Adesanya. He canceled a speaking tour and some shit. But I also saw a video where he was watching this and he was like, I want to fight Darren Till. So sorry, Darren. Now you have to fight Robert Whittaker. It's over. The dream is dead once again. But yeah, for what it was in isolation, it made sense. I liked seeing Darren Till do something different that made sense. Okay, let's take one more break. When we come back, Stephen Thompson. The boy did it against Vicente Luque. Tremendous performance. Derrick Lewis. Weirdly promising performance. Derrick Lewis is skinny now.
This was the greatest physical and technical performance of Derrick Lewis's career.
Which is saying something, because it was still really bad. Kevin Lee, also sadly skinnier now, but an incredible performance, and more besides. Like I said, a lot of shit happened. We may have to hit some of it in pretty quick fashion, but we're going to do as much as we can after this.
Financial support is fantastic, but there are other, even easier ways to support Heavy Hands. Perhaps the best is by spreading the word. We know our fan base. You're all cool, popular people with serious social media presences. You're tastemakers and trendsetters. Okay, there are 1 or 2 of you that don't fit that description. You know who you are, but no matter what, you can always help us out by telling folks about the show. You can also give us a positive rating and review on iTunes and Stitcher, things like that. We rely on word of mouth and positive feedback to grow and improve, so thank you very much for your time and your help. Now, back to the show.
All right, welcome back to Heavy Hands. Let's keep moving down this card. Reverse chronological order seems to be the way of things on this show. Stephen Thompson beat Vicente Luque very soundly. Gave Vicente Luque the worst beating of his career. Gave him a worse beating, dare I say, than even Mike Perry was able to deliver. Phil, you want to take it away on this one?
Yeah, I mean, this looked initially like it was going to be super bad for Stephen Thompson.
Yes, it did.
I mean, I think, all due credit to Vicente Luque and his team for coming up, for having a great strategy. It was pretty much exactly what you would want. It was throwaway low kicks to start off, so that he wasn't necessarily, putting himself out of position. It was herding Stephen Thompson into the cage. It was punching and kicking in combination, and it was working really well, and it was looking kind of bleak. And suddenly you find yourself thinking, wow, Stephen Thompson sure has beaten a lot of people, because, he's always, got, a big size advantage, but Luque is a big physical guy.
Mm-hmm.
Is Stephen Thompson at, now being however how many years older? 11 years older than Luque? Is he 37 to Luque's 26?
I think
something
so,
along
yeah.
those lines.
10
You know,
years
is he
older, 27 to 37.
Yeah. Is he gonna? You know, there's a solid chance he's just gonna get muscled out of this fight, and he's gonna get chopped to pieces because his style is also not attritional. He's not someone that really works the body much. He's not. You know, he's a headhunter.
Mm-hmm.
This is looking like it's going to be his Machida Shogun fight.
Mm-hmm.
And then he turned it all around.
Mm-hmm.
And it goes to show you, like,
in large
how,
part by being a tough motherfucker.
Yeah.
Like, that was one of the key ingredients is that everyone seems to overlook. Stephen Thompson, like, I mean, he's not as durable as Vicente Luque physically, but mentally speaking, this man has been in and can win wars.
Yeah. And it goes to show you that, like, there are tools which can trouble Stephen Thompson, but you're going to need to do more than just have them. Like,
yeah,
you need to be able to combine them with some serious nuance.
Mm-hmm.
And so firstly, it was, you know, Vicente Luque's pressuring footwork is not really up to snuff.
Mm-hmm.
He is, you know, pretty much gonna, but this is, again, you know, by the standards of a welterweight striker, it's still pretty decent, but
Mm-hmm.
Stephen Thompson's ring craft is simply very, very, very good.
Yep.
He is able to change directions, change stances, and, you know, a lot of the time this is something which, you know, is overhyped in MMA commentary, but, like, his ability to, like, switch stances and also to, like, strike with either hand from his
Mm-hmm.
stance without, you know, without a tell at all. Like, occasionally he would take some quite risky choices of just standing there in his huge splayed horse stance.
Mm-hmm.
He would just take the kick on his front leg and then just either jab or throw the rear hand, like, from that position. Like, if Luque had moved around to take an angle on him there, he would have been in serious trouble. But, like, he started taking serious, like, serious risks in order to, he was taking reads on Luque, not
Mm-hmm.
risks, let's say. He was saying, I'm pretty sure I know what you're going to do, and I'm going to put myself in danger in order to stop it. And the other thing that he did, which is, you know, somewhat anathema to, like, the movement heavy style of MMA, you know, is that he refused to concede the outside in any greater sense, in that they told him not to get behind the black lines. He just didn't. He moved around,
Yep.
but the amount of times that he actually got put into the moat on the outside of the cage after that first round was very, very small, and he would take damage or risk in order rather than giving up position. And so it became a very gritty fight, and Luque had to wade through tons of damage to get at him.
Yep. It was a perfect marriage for Stephen Thompson of an incredibly gutsy and an incredibly intelligent performance. I think you're right. Like, the key moments of this fight, or the key factor in this fight, was Thompson's ability to play gambits, you know, to make those reads and realize it was a strategic awareness from Stephen Thompson that, like, he was getting into some trouble in those exchanges, and he could have made the very rational decision that I want to get away from these exchanges. I need to engage less. You know, I need to stay at an even safer distance. Instead, he realized, quite rightly, that he was going to have to pick his spots to fucking fire back. He was going to have to nail Luque in these exchanges, break some of that early confidence. And this fight is eminently rewatchable because of that, because you can see all of these key moments where Thompson starts to pick apart the, as you said, quite intelligent approach that Luque brought into the fight. I don't know if this is me quibbling with something you said or not, the leading with low kicks, there's definitely a rationale, a logic to that. I think it ended up being Thompson was able to turn that into a bad tactic, though, on Luque's part. Like, the first round, the low kicks were landing a lot. Luque probably won the first 3 minutes of that round very clearly. By round 3, each time Luque picked up that leg to lead with a leg kick, he was getting nailed. He was getting absolutely killed by the straight counters of Stephen Thompson. And I think maybe that just comes down to who Vicente Luque is, but he very clearly, in his mind, I think the goal is land punches, hit the other guy in the face. You hit really hard, so get to that. And maybe that's behind the whole pattern of leading with the kicks in order to get into punching distance, in order to start trading hooks. But I think he might have been well served to throw away punches with the idea of landing the hard low kick at the end, right? That's the Shogun Rua versus Lyoto Machida approach. The low kick that you catch the guy with as he's protecting his head, pulling his head out of distance and leaving his legs behind in the process, that can be the goal of the exchange. And it was clear the low kicks were not the goal in Vicente Luque's mind. They were a way for him to bridge the distance so that he could knock Stephen Thompson out. I get it, and I think that's just who Vicente Luque is. He's a puncher. But once Stephen Thompson once he started thinking of this as a fight in which he was going to have to pick his spots to make risky moves to back Luque off, he very quickly, like by the end of the first round, realized that every time Luque tried to lead with that little relatively light outside low kick to the lead leg, he was going to nail him with a counter right down the middle. And once he picked up on that, Luque had basically no reliable ways to close the distance. Like, Vicente Luque is just not a fighter who can throw away punches without putting max effort into them. He wants to hit you with hard shots. So that was great from Stephen Thompson. But there were some other moments that were like really, really risky, where he had his back to the fence and had to exchange like 2 and 3 punch combinations and just trust in his accuracy and his ability to see things coming. Yeah. I also want to say, Stephen Thompson, great performance. No like major changes, right? Like, he's still the Stephen Thompson we know and love and or hate. Luca, talking to you. The things that really worried me were, and again, I think this was a bit of a strategic gambit, something that made sense to do. But Stephen Thompson is really at his most vulnerable when he is trying to pressure. Because all the moments that he was keeping Luque's back to the fence, like every time he hurt Luque and then backed him up to the fence, Stephen Thompson got nailed on the chin. He could not predict the counters of Luque. Maybe that just comes down to his punching mechanics. He's such a like dynamic loping puncher that, he has a hard time keeping himself back over his feet, when he's actually pressing forward. But that's exactly how Anthony Pettis knocked him out in his last fight, is him trying to attack while up against the cage. And seeing how effective Luque was in those moments does make me just a little bit forgive Stephen Thompson for his performances against Tyron Woodley. Because I'm like, if you're aware that you have this flaw in your style, I mean, I would like to see you try to fix it. But if you haven't fixed it, I kind of get why you would be really, really reluctant to lead on Tyron Woodley, even though he has his back to the fence the entire fight.
Well, I mean, this fight in itself was also it was an indictment of the idea that, like, hands up, because that was Luque's sole defense.
Yeah.
But it's worth noting that is a defense that Stephen Thompson does not have at all, nor does he move his head. So that when he is throwing, he throws a sharp, accurate, good punch, and then he will bring it back to his chest, and his head will be there.
Yep.
And maybe he will scoot backwards very, very quickly. And that's it. Like, that's Stephen Thompson's defense after throwing a punch.
Occasionally he will slip over whatever his rear leg happens to be at the moment. But even that, not super consistent.
Yeah, so you can see why, like, Luque was just like, okay, if I feel this guy punch me hard, I can punch him hard.
He was right.
That was true.
Yeah, he was right. All that being said, really gutsy, really intelligent performance from Stephen Thompson. I feel quite vindicated. I feel quite vindicated, having picked him and chosen to attack Luque Bourdon by defending his approach to fighting before this. All right, what else? Maybe we may only have time to cover the rest of the main card here. Maybe we'll have to schedule a bonus episode for later this week, Phil. I don't know.
Sounds good to me.
Because there's more stuff to talk about on these prelims. There's actually quite a bit, I think, that was significant. Like Edmund Shabazian, Shane Burgos, Corey Anderson, Caitlin Chukagian, Lyman Good. I want to talk about all of those things. But let's close it out with the main card. Derrick Lewis, real quick for this one, because it was, despite it being the best performance of Derrick Lewis's career, it was a technical mess. It was really, really awful. It was a heavyweight fight, right? So like there were periods of insane jaw clenching violence with both guys just swinging huge hams at each other and missing by an inch. And then like long periods of them being really tired and sweaty and holding on to each other.
I'm going to say something controversial here.
Do it.
Derrick Lewis improving his, Derrick Lewis training hard and improving his physicality and generally, fighting like a normal person is destroying his greatest weapon.
It's ruined him. Are you talking about, let me guess, is his greatest weapon that he's so big that when you tie up with him, you die from exhaustion?
No.
Okay.
His greatest weapon is drawing people in when they look at how incredibly upset he is. Did you notice how unupset Derrick Lewis was in this fight?
Yeah. Distressing. He didn't look like a wounded elk at almost any moment.
How many times did you see him visibly sigh and look just like this was the worst thing ever?
He didn't
do any of that. He looked like some measure of trained fighter athlete person doing their job, and
he didn't even stop
as a result,
to cringe and put both hands over his belly at any point.
Exactly, right?
Yeah.
He's ruined all his incredibly unfakeable, because they were clearly true, playing awesome abilities.
I think you're right.
By becoming better at MMA. And now he's just going to win boring decisions instead of getting completely fucked up and then annihilating the other person with the sheer power of grief that he's stored up.
I think you're right, because Derrick Lewis, his entire UFC career has just been a treatise on what makes heavyweight work as a division. The fact that he's just not quite killable but is always on the verge of death. That's what's made him so effective against so many opponents. They get so tired trying to finish him, and he hits him with one big bungalow and the fight's over. So yeah, I think we may have lost that. I am not willing to say that this is a permanent change for Derrick Lewis. I feel I know Derrick Lewis too well to believe that this is just a new direction for him. So I'm not quite so doom and gloom about that. But he did look skinny, and he didn't get tired quite so fast. He did mention that he was trying to stick his fist into the booty hole in Ivanov's chest. Did he say that?
Yes. And he was saying that his hands were too sweaty and he knows the guy likes it raw.
Fucking absurd.
Yeah, but in all fairness, Ivanov is one of the most insanely tough people I've seen. Lewis did actually hit him with tons of really clean shots where I was just I don't know if I can think of a heavyweight who could have taken that shot.
Right.
That was completely ridiculous. So yeah, it actually genuinely was a pretty impressive performance from Derrick Lewis by Derrick Lewis standards, but I feel like something has been lost.
Yeah. It does give you an impression of what the different standards are for each division, right? Because Gastelum Till sucked, but in this fight, Ivanov landed 20 significant strikes total to Derrick Lewis's 31. and yet it did feel significantly more exciting. It was still much more of a mess. I'll give it that.
I was talking to I had some friends around to watch it, and one of them was like, and I was like, that's the 5th ranked heavyweight in the world. She was like, Can we watch the Kevin Lee Greg Gillespie division?
I think that's the lesson to give casuals. I also was watching with someone who's not a diehard fan of MMA and got a very similar comment. Like, I think it was actually the Thompson Luque fight being immediately after the Lewis Ivanov fight. Stark contrast. All that being said, I really enjoyed the Derrick Lewis fight. It was great. Okay. Well, Kevin Lee Gillespie, you just mentioned it. We have to talk about it. I want to lead off by saying that I think this was... I mean, it was TriStar Kevin Lee, no doubt. And I am waiting for the upcoming fight in which he is going to become a devotee of the Imanari role. But as far as his use of the other TriStar weapon, the jab, I think this fight represented a really significant development in the game of Kevin Lee. Like, I am now convinced that TriStar can be a really good home for him. I think one of the good things about Kevin Lee has always been his coachability. We talked about this extensively last week, but Kevin Lee is a fighter who can be reliably pointed in a direction with a couple of like simple, straightforward goals in mind, and will just go like a dynamo. He is just going to keep chugging along. Maybe not great at adapting to what changes along the way, but very, very committed to the game plan you give him. And the fact that Gillespie is faster, and certainly looked like it in this fight, like hand speed was a major difference. The Gillespie is like more fluid and more creative as a striker. All of those things I think would have been much better problems with an older version of Lee, because all of that meant that Lee had to take advantage of his reach to win the striking in this fight. And I am not sure that an older version of Kevin Lee would have stuck to the jab so what's the word I'm looking for? Give me a big word, Phil. Assiduously? Tenaciously. I don't think an older Kevin Lee would have possessed that kind of focus. You know, like on a technical level, he still looks a little stiff, still looks a little awkward, but like Darren Till against Gastelum, his process was different. He was focused on the right ways to use his physical attributes, and I thought he did great.
Yeah, I mean, this is one of the things is like Kevin Lee he's got the same basic body type as GSP, which makes you think like, wow, this could be great. You know, he's got a wrestling background. He's a 5'8", 5'9" guy with, you know, great explosion and like freakishly fucking long arms. Just like fighting from a low stance with a long jab, like that's great. And you know, he feinted it. He kept it out there. Like over the course, like there was a lot of people saying that like Gillespie was chewing him up in the striking. I really felt like it was very even.
I agree,
and I felt like Lee was actually like, even before he knocked him out, I felt like Lee was starting to figure him out.
Yep, he had just started
throwing away. He was throwing away the strikes to bring the reactions out, and then he saw which way Gillespie was slipping, threw the right hand after it, and then came with the left kick of doom.
Yeah, he had just started to draw out and recounter Gillespie like 2 or 3 times really nicely before the one that preceded the knockout.
Yeah, so I mean, it was great to see. I mean, and both him and Till, like, they gave about the best post-fight speeches you could imagine.
Yeah, Lee was great.
After those things, and it was just like, it also reminded me of Mark Casey and guys like that. They were just like, you know what, I was in a bad place. I didn't know how I was gonna be able to pull this out. But you know, I'm not going to talk about title shots or, you know, anything like that. I'm just gonna get better for the next time. Which
is the right thing to do, I think. You know, Kevin Lee is still very young. You he still should have time to develop. And, like his losses have put him in a position where he felt he had no choice but to really focus on how he might be able to change his approach to become the fighter he felt like he should be. And it seems like thus far, the move to TriStar was a really solid one. I loved the jab. Go on.
And it's worth saying that, like, one of the issues that there can be with TriStar is that they are somewhat of a limited. They can be somewhat of a limited and control-based gym. They come with a game plan, and then it's designed to control a fight rather than maybe end it.
Mm-hmm.
But one of the good things about Lee is that he is almost accidentally incredibly violent.
Yes, he is like really powerful and.
Yeah, he is one of the most finish-oriented fighters in the lightweight division. I think he's maybe tied with Ferguson, or he's coming up on Ferguson's finish rate, I think. He's got 7 finishes in the division.
Well, he's not quite as close as Ferguson looking at it, but he's got, 18 wins overall, 3 knockouts, 8 submissions, 7 decisions. He's got a very healthy finishing percentage.
But most of his finishes are in the UFC over quality opposition, which is the crazy thing.
His last decision was over Efrain Escudero in 2016. Since then, he's finished everyone he's beaten.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, I think it could be a really good fit for Kevin Lee. I found his post-fight speech to be very endearing, very honest. And this is the thing that we talked about liking about Kevin Lee last week. He's a thoughtful, reflective person who just also sometimes has a chip on his shoulder. I like him.
Oh, that's okay.
Yeah. Well,
yeah, in general, I said this on Twitter afterwards. It was just this card wasn't just good in a, this was engaging violence, which kept me on the edge of my seat. People got fucked up in weird ways kind of way. But this was a good fight, and this was a good card, and yeah, you alluded to it at the beginning of the episode as well, in that it was just heartening, a lot of it. A lot of it was, I was just like, oh yeah, Jorge Masvidal, this is your time in the sun. Nate Diaz got his, and he had his time in the sun, the win over Conor McGregor, and, millions of dollars that came with it. And now, finally, Jorge's getting his time. Darren Till turning it back around. Stephen Thompson back against the wall.
Mm-hmm.
Derrick Lewis just being Derrick Lewis.
I think even that counts. Derrick Lewis working hard, becoming a professional fighter.
That's very true, actually. I shouldn't be as dismissive.
That's
Kevin
big.
Lee, and then, we'd talk about him later, Corey Anson, Shane Burgos, and, just tons of people just showing the fuck up. And at times when you might not necessarily have expected them to, or you might have been worried about them. And so it was just it was a card that I was able to look back on and just think fuck yeah, UFC 244.
That's what you want, right? We like to talk about the technical aspects of this. We like to talk about strategy and all of that. But, the reason we watch fighting is for the stories, it's for the inspiring characters, for moments of triumph, fights where, people are forced to confront some element of their real selves. And yeah, from a story, narrative, personal development, growth perspective, this card was like you said, it felt very good. There were a lot of genuine triumphs on this card for many of the fighters. So very cathartic experience watching it. I really enjoyed it. And I loved talking about it. And let's see. I guess we just sort of decided that we're going to try to do a bonus recap. I don't know if we'll do that right now or if we will do it a little later this week, but keep your eyes on the Heavy Hands Patreon for that. There is also had some issues with the Spence Porter boxing commentary, but this week you will see a make good commentary of oh my god, man, my mind has just been a sieve for
Canelo Kovalev.
No, not that one. It was the one that happened last weekend. Which one was it?
So
Regis
long ago
Prograis
now.
versus Josh Taylor. Fantastic fight. I already recorded a commentary for that one, so it just has to be uploaded and posted. So yeah, look to the Heavy Hands Patreon for that stuff. Otherwise, before we wrap up, anything coming out this week, Phil?
Nope, just previews. So yeah, I've been meaning to write stuff and it hasn't been coming out yet lately, but previews are always going to be there. So yeah, Magomedsharipov versus Kattar.
Cool. As for me, I am planning on doing something recap oriented. I'm finally like free of doing scouting work on the side. I want to try to take advantage and get an article out there. If you didn't check it out, I think it's probably still worth reading. My piece on Stephen Thompson from last week, like Phil's previews, you can find that on Bloody Elbow. Otherwise, keep your eyes peeled for, I don't know, either a Canelo piece or a Darren Till piece, or maybe something else. Maybe I'll write about Kattar Zabit and do a preview instead. I don't know. But I'm doing my best to put out something this week. Again, you'll find that on bloodyelbow.com. You can find both Phil and me on Twitter if you want to scream at us about how, in fact, Blago Ivanov is not the toughest heavyweight, and actually it's, I don't know, someone else. You can do that by finding us on there. Phil's at Evil Greg Jackson. I am at Boxing Bush, B-U-S-C-H. And until next week, we thank you once again for listening, all you guys out there. And if you came here today for the finer points of face punching, you know you came to the right place. This has been Heavy Hands.